Hello, everybody. Happy Thursday and welcome. So happy to have everyone here with me today. And we have an awesome topic and a really special guest for you today. I'm really super excited to introduce copywriter extraordinaire Lindsay Hotmeyer to all of you. So I'm going to have Lindsay share a little bit about her story here in just a few moments. But let me first give you just a quick update or rundown on what we are going to be covering in today's live stream for you. So we're going to be talking about how to market yourself without losing your soul. Don't you love that title? And specifically some real life marketing strategies to help you to reach out and connect with real people. We're going to be talking about how to build a brand in terms of relationship building, which is so very important nowadays. Why clients want to connect with real people who they know, like, and trust, and a little bit about really being your authentic self inside of your marketing, right? And really why no marketing rule will work if you do not honor who you are. And I love that too. So with that little bit of background, welcome, Lindsay. Really, again, I'm so happy to have you. And guys, I should preface this whole conversation by letting you know that I actually have a brand new website. Super excited. We just turned on the live button. Gosh, I think on Friday evening. And Lindsay helped me to put the copy together. So I can definitely attest to just the amazing writing. So go ahead and check that out when you have a chance at lesliebytel.com. So welcome, Lindsay. I would love to kick things off with you just sharing a little bit about your story. How did you end up where you are today? And tell us a
Yeah,
little bit about what that role is.
yeah, absolutely. So excited to be here. Always love chatting with you, Leslie. How I got to be here, let's see. I went and I started my own business back in 2016, and I was 39 at the time, and I have 4 children, and so they were all big enough that all the other options for me in the workforce just weren't aligning with the rest of the life that I wanted to live, as well as just I'm just programmed to be a business owner. I'm unemployable, as people would say, I'm not.
I
Yes.
always say that. Like, even if I wanted to find a job now,
Yeah,
not sure how
it's
that would work
over.
out.
It's over. It's over. So
Those things are long gone.
I stepped out of the workforce in 2016, and started kind of this journey of what does it look like to be a business owner. I knew I loved to help people find the right words and put all those pieces together, but figuring out how to merge that into like a real business, that was a journey, as we all know. That was hard. And so now as a brand storyteller, as a copywriter, my passion and my true gift is digging beyond like that surface message with my clients and really finding the story, because the story is the thing that creates the messaging. And I was just talking with a client of mine today who's 65. She's been a professional businesswoman since she was 20. And just worked with her to find her brand story. And that was so powerful to be invited into that with somebody who's 65, who's lived a lot of life, super self-aware, rich story, but she had never owned it. And so to be able to do that with somebody like that is just like, that's just what fuels me. That's what makes my heart go pitter patter. And so that's me in a nutshell.
I love that. And 4 kids. Wow. What's the age range?
Our oldest is 21 and our youngest is 15. He just got his driver's permit and we're all sad because how can our
Right?
baby be driving? It's terrible.
Oh my gosh. So, yeah. So, and how old is your second from the oldest?
They stair step, so it's 21, 19,
Okay.
17, and 15.
Okay. Okay.
So
So
I was
it's funny. I
pregnant for like 6 years.
1-year-old. Oh my God, totally. I stopped after the 19-year-old. I've a 21-year-old and a 19-year-old, and then we stopped.
Yeah.
So you were pregnant at least a couple more years after
Yeah.
that, right?
Yeah.
Oh my God. All right. So, okay. So let's dig into, some of this awesome information and these strategies that we want to talk about
Yeah.
today when it
Yeah.
comes to messaging and pulling out the story, which honestly is not easy for people to do, right? I mean, as a business mentor, I've looked at a lot of websites and a lot of, directory listings, all of that. And so often it's like it's about our education, right? Like that's kind of the story that many of us choose to tell on our websites.
Right.
So where does one even begin? Like, what can you tell us a little bit from your perspective about, what is a brand story? Where do we even start with that?
Yeah. Yeah. And let me just pick up with what you mentioned. So much of it is about, like our credentials. And I think as women, especially, that's really easy for us to step in and feel
Yeah.
like we have to justify why we have a seat at the
Mhm.
table. And so the danger can be like to kind of strip away the real parts of who we are to hyper focus on, hey, this is who I am and why I deserve to be here. Here's why you should trust me. And here's how I'm the expert. And
Mm.
all of that stuff has a place in our brand story. But just like those details probably aren't the details that are going to connect you deeply to somebody in the real world. Like I never connect to somebody on a deep level by being like, hey, I'm Lindsay, I'm a brand storyteller. Like that's not what turns the lights on. And that's the same in our online businesses. Like those aren't the details that turn the lights on and make those connections between us and our clients. And it really comes down to taking a posture of guide versus expert. And I have a metaphor that I'll share later, which I think will illustrate this even more. But like there's a difference between showing up as a guide versus expert. And I think expert is like the old way of doing business, right? It's maybe the early 2000s of be that expert. But what our audiences are craving more of, and I think part of that is because of the social overload where everybody's connected but very disconnected. They're looking for that guide. And a guide is somebody who is on the path with you. They're in it with you. They're sitting across from you at the desk. They are helping you make those real-time adjustments on your path versus an expert who is the person on your bookshelf in your office, right? They're the book writer. They're the ones who say, hey, I've been there, I've done that. Here's how I've done it. And while you can glean a lot of insight and wisdom from that, it's still not real time, completely applicable to you. And so when we step into our audience's lives as that guide, that creates more of those authentic connections.
I love that. The authenticity piece is huge, right?
Absolutely. Yeah.
And and it's like it kind of reminds me of like the practitioner model of being the expert, putting on the expert hat and telling you what to do, right? Instead of kind of walking with you and actually, traveling that journey with you in order to help you to implement, right?
Absolutely.
So really such an important distinction there in terms of telling versus maybe showing, right?
Right. Absolutely.
So let's dig in a little bit with, formulas and frameworks, because I know that you've got some thoughts around, following those kinds of things. And, oftentimes it can be so tempting because like, ooh, a formula, or, plug in a blank, right? Like kind of like the Mad Libs
Absolutely.
process, right? And that could be so tempting, but what would you say kind of the pitfalls are in following those types of templates and frameworks?
Yeah. So I always say, like, the caveat of formulas and frameworks are great. We all use them. We teach with them, you know, we guide with them. And so they're great. The danger and the frustration that I see with formulas and frameworks is when they front load our process. And so when we're thinking about ourselves as a brand and really just kind of trying to get started and really find our message, whether we're just getting started or like you know, you've been in business for a long time and you're like, I need to refine this message. Like something needs to be,
Right.
something more needs to be there. And so when we, the best way that I'll just, because I'm a storyteller, I'll use a metaphor.
That would be awesome.
One of the metaphors that I love to use is that of a mountaintop journey when I talk about how to build authentic connections with your audience. And so if you just imagine with me that you're prepping to go on this mountaintop journey, and you know that there's plenty of documentaries out there that we can watch. There's plenty of how-to guides, plenty of books that you can buy to read that are going to lay out all the formulas, all the mental and physical frameworks that we need to have in order to be able to climb that mountain. But if you absorb all of that knowledge and then you go out and you try to climb the mountain without doing any practice runs first, without doing any training, you might actually die on that path. Like that's how grim the reality is. Because depending on the mountain that you climb, you might have to put in months, maybe years of training before you understand who you are as a climber. Like you have to know how your body works. You have to know how your body is going to feel. You have to know the mind tricks that your brain is going to play on you, specifically you. You know, you and I on the same path, we're going to respond completely differently to obstacles that come in front of us. And so once you've done that deep inner work to really understand who you are on that path, then you're ready to get on the path and climb that mountain. So when I talk about formulas and frameworks, that's the picture that I think of, is that when we front load our business and our message with formulas and frameworks, we're like that climber who didn't put in any work at the time and just went out and climbed the mountain. And then we wind up a year, 2 years, 5 years, 20 years with some pretty deep wounds because we didn't figure out who we were actually going to be on that path. So that's the big thing to me, is that you can't front load your story, figuring out who you are and how you're going to show up with those fill in the blank templates, because you wind up building your empire, so to speak, on somebody else's path or on somebody else's mountain. And that just doesn't work. It doesn't hold.
Right. It's definitely not a good long-term plan, right?
Right. And it's not, I mean, if you're not concerned with being real and authentic and you're fine just playing the game and filling in those steps, then it might work okay for you for a long time. But eventually your audience is going to find somebody else that they actually can connect with in an authentic way, or it's going to fracture at some point. We saw that fracture for a lot of brands during COVID and during the rise of George Floyd, and when conversations about brand values and positioning really exploded. We saw what happens when people build their empires on somebody else's rock, because people started getting called out for living and positioning themselves in ways that weren't really true.
So interesting. I don't think I looked at it that way, or I didn't. I didn't. I noticed people getting called out for sure.
Yeah.
But I don't think I made that connection.
Yeah. I mean, it's a scary time as a business owner to be in a place where our audience is peering really deep and close at us saying, are you who you say you are? But that's who our audience collectively, that's what an audience has become. They're expecting as much out of their brand as they do their government, their churches, their organizations. They're expecting those same things out of their brands. And if you're going to deliver that, you've got to you can't skip that deep work.
Right. Oh, so interesting. So what would you say, what is maybe one of the easiest, perhaps the most often neglected ways to show up with an authentic marketing message?
Yeah. You know, when when we create our message, one of the things that one of the, like the overarching pieces of advice, I've said it, I'm sure you've said it, audience has heard it. It's not about you, right? It's not about you. It's about your audience. And while that's true, that when it comes to building our brand and that foundational piece, I'm going to turn that on its head and say it actually is very much about you. It has to be. You have to understand who you are. So what, you know, I said when I was 39, 6 years ago, I formed my business. I had lived enough life. I had 4 kids. I had had careers. I had lived a diverse life. I'm pretty self-aware, sometimes too self-aware to my detriment. And so I didn't think that I needed to do this work. Not that I had it figured out, but connecting who I was off brand to who I am on brand. That's a different kind of work. And I wasn't prepared to have to do that. And so I got, 1 to 2 years into my business, and I'm like, I've followed all the formulas. I've done all these step-by-step things, and this just doesn't feel like me. Like it wasn't working internally, deep in my soul, it just wasn't working. And so I had to go back and ask myself some pretty identity finding questions. Like, who is Lindsay? Like, to her core, who is she? What strengths am I bringing on that mountain path journey? What strengths am I showing up with? What weaknesses are going to try to sabotage me? That's a big one. Like we all have these inherent weaknesses and strengths, and some of our weaknesses we can work to overcome, but there's others that are just like an inherent part of who we are. I'm very introverted. Networking is a weakness of mine because I prefer my dark corner in the room. And so I know I have to work to overcome that, but there's other things that I just have to structure my business around, that no matter how much I try to write them out of Lindsay, it's just not going to happen. So I needed to know my weaknesses, and then I needed to think about what stories consistently connect me to others, because those are the pieces that I'm going to want to make sure somehow show up in my brand story, in my messaging, in the way that I structure my process, and maybe even in my service offerings, how I decide to show up. Like, I know I'm not going to ever create this large group program where I'm taking 100 people through at a time, because that's not how I work. And so when I have tried to do that, because I have, it's like backpedaling. Like, and anybody who knows me, it's like, I don't know what you were thinking, Lindsay. Like, that's not you. So it's asking those questions, and being honest with yourself, talking to friends, your spouse, your partners, having them give you feedback as well. And then being brave enough to honor the answers, and then building around that.
Well, I remember when we started working together, how you asked some pretty deep questions, right?
Right.
And it really required some introspection,
right,
to be able
Absolutely.
to answer that.
Like, when part of you showing up authentically is where you talk about doing ballet,
right,
and spending your whole life doing ballet, even when you didn't want to. Your mom made you, and that's what made you be such a fierce force for showing up to your clients. In therapy, narrative therapy is a term that I've recently come across, and they talk about the concept of the thin line. And in storytelling, we call this the dominant story. So we all have a tendency to tell a dominant story about ourselves, about others. Narrative therapists call this the thin line. But the reality is, so as business owners, we often are tempted to create our message based on this thin line of who's Leslie as business coach, who's Lindsay as storyteller, and everything we tell centers on those things. But there are other storylines all around us. Leslie as ballet dancer, Lindsay as piano player, Lindsay as mom, Leslie as mom. There's all these other storylines that play a role into who we are today. And so
Mhm.
narrative therapy looks at those other lines and says, let's thicken that thin line, because there's
Okay.
more to you than just that thin line. There's more to us than just that dominant story. And so when we are crafting a message, we want to thicken that line in ways that give us depth as characters in our audience's lives. Like, we aren't just one dimensional. We're not just coaches. We're not just, I'm not just a brand storyteller. There's so much more to me. And those
Right.
other storylines are the pieces that allow me to show up the way that I do. And so that's a way that you can show up and infuse your copy or your messaging, your marketing, and with authentic pieces. It doesn't have to be huge, like the ballet comment with you. That's not a huge piece of your copy, but it's
Right.
there. And somebody reads it. Now they know a little bit more about Leslie than they did before, and it helps to build a connection.
It does. Yeah, I can see that. So, like, for our audience today, well, actually, I'd love to ask our audience, where are you with building your story? Right? Like, what, like, what is that dominant or the thin line, as Lindsay said, so eloquently, in building your story? Do you have that level of awareness? Because I think it can be super challenging to, because like we all have so many stories in our
Mhm.
in our past, in our history, and honestly, before I met Lindsay, I didn't, like, I knew ballet was a huge part of really my entire childhood, through most of my teens up until the age of 19, right? So I knew it was significant, but frankly, I never realized that that was, a great story to tell. You know what I'm saying, in terms of my brand.
Right.
So, like, I guess it does make me wonder, where do people start in terms of identifying what that core story is?
Yeah. Yeah, and that can be really hard. And I think a lot, maybe more so for like Gen Xers and above, because it feels like oversharing. We don't want,
Oh,
I don't
okay.
want to
Understood.
put myself out there, and maybe
Uh-huh.
because I am so introverted, but
Mhm.
I didn't grow up in a world where I just shared all the details of my life. And so
Yeah.
it's that struggle of, do these people really need to know this or not? And so
Right.
part of deciding what to share is there's no formula, there's no percentage, there's no
Mhm.
rule. It really depends on, one, who you are and what you're comfortable with, and two, what does your audience need? And so if you think back to that mountaintop journey, and you think, if you just imagine yourself at the beginning of a path, and there's a long path, and then there's the mountain, and then up on top of the mountain is our audience. And so
Mhm.
our goal is to try to reach our audience. And so you need to think about, what does my audience, no, two things. What does my audience need to see from me in order to trust me to even join them up on that mountain? And then two, what are they going to need from me in order to trust me and like me enough
Mm.
to come down off the mountain with me? And so those are the two driving questions. And the only way that you can answer that is to eliminate your assumptions about your audience. So that's the first step. And that begins by having actual conversations with your audience. And this is a piece that continues to be like, continues to shock me, how many business owners don't have real conversations with their audience.
Oh,
They build their offers, their brand message. They build that based on what they think they know, or they build it based on the fact that, well, I I deal with 40-year-old women and older. I am my ideal client, so
right.
I understand her. I don't need to talk to her. Or I was just talking to somebody today, and it's really scary. It can be really scary to talk to a client to say, not only tell me about who you are, but, okay, you've known me for a while.
Right.
What areas can I improve in? And how do I stack up
Um,
against other people that, like, those heart to heart, honest conversations can be scary, but they are like so rich with information and detail,
mhm.
to where those conversations oftentimes write the story that you need to tell for you. They're
Okay.
keying you in on two things that we need to know about our audience. We need to know, what is their problem story?
Mm-hmm.
You know, what it's pretty self-explanatory, right? What is their problem? What is the story in their head that's causing the problem? What are they focused on? What are they fixated on? What do they want to fix? And then two, what is their preferred story? So you have the problem story, and then we want to know, what is the version of life that they want to live in? And then we have to figure out how to get them from problem story to preferred story, and building that bridge. That's where our stories come into play.
And building the likability and the trust, right?
Correct.
Those
Correct.
two super important variables.
Correct.
Okay. So interesting. Yeah, it's way more than telling everyone about your credentials, right?
Absolutely. You know, and you asked for a how, you know, thinking about those credentials. I think a question that somebody could take themselves through to maybe find those stories is, what led me to get these credentials in the first place? What did that journey look like? And not just the 4 years through school, but from when is the first time in my life that I had an inkling that I wanted to do something like this? You know, it might not have been this exact thing, because, you know, at 10 years old, you probably didn't even know this job existed. But those traits that were burning inside of you, even as a kid, that burned through you all through, like, dig deep and think about those. Think about stories in your life that display those traits, and then you're going to have some stories to tell.
I can remember when I was in 3rd grade, I remember doing this little exercise, like draw a picture of who you want to be when you grow up. I remember that. It's so bizarre. I remember, this is kind of funny, I remember saying I want to have 6 kids and be a doctor. 6 kids, and be a doctor. I was like, it wasn't like I was vacillating with it. Was like, this is it. So pretty funny. Definitely this, you know, the science thing. It's just there. Like you can't like make someone want to. It's just, I just think it's who you are.
Yep. Absolutely. Yeah.
So it's so funny. Did you want to be a writer even when you were a kid?
Oh yeah. I always say I wrote my first book and stapled it together and stuck it in my days of the week underwear drawer when I was like 6. You know, I was always writing, always telling stories. Sometimes
fascinating, Lindsay.
Stories in unethical ways sometimes, you know, to get myself out of detention and things like that.
Oh my God. So funny. So you were who you are.
Absolutely.
Even at the age of 6. I just find that so interesting, you know, when you think back.
Yeah.
So how do you actually make your clients feel seen and heard? Let's talk a little bit about that.
Yeah. I think it goes back to number one, that having the conversation with them. Because when you have those real conversations with your clients, you start using language that isn't just familiar to them, it is their language. And so that's the biggest piece of the puzzle right there, and making them feel seen and heard, is having conversations and listening to them. And then, you know, when you do that, and think back to that mountain metaphor, if they trust you enough to get to them, and I said, then you have to figure out how to get them down off of the mountain. To me, in marketing and branding language, that is what messages and services are you going to offer to actually convince them that it's worth coming down with you. And this is another big piece of the puzzle where we can sabotage our own marketing efforts, because we create something that either we just think is, you know, the greatest thing since sliced bread, or something that we needed, but it isn't something that's reflecting what your audience really needs. And so if you're creating programs, messages, or programs, services, offers that really get to the core of that problem story that they have, that's going to show them how they can cross that bridge to that preferred story. How else you can make them feel seen or heard. Let me see if I have anything on my notes that I haven't talked about. I feel like I've talked a lot about some of these things. I think another piece is a mistake that we will sometimes make, especially when we're just starting out, is that we feel like we have to be in all the places at once, right? We have to be
Mhm.
on Facebook, we have to be on Instagram, we have to be on LinkedIn, we
Yeah,
have to have a YouTube
super
channel.
common, like
Ugh,
everything at once, right?
it's exhausting. And
Yeah.
so, you hear, and it's true, the advice to niche down, focus on a
Mhm.
very specific market. And that is also true for your audience and
Mhm.
finding them and meeting them. Like, you don't have to be in all the places at once. Pick one, I call it content vehicle, that you
Yeah.
can use. And that's going to, you can, thinking of the mountaintop journey, you can only ride in one car at once. Like, you can't take 5 cars to get to the mountain when there's only one of you.
Right.
So which one are you going to take? For me, it's LinkedIn. For me, my
Okay.
style is writing. I don't like to do YouTube videos. I just don't like it. Like, I can do it. I just don't, I don't like it. And
Yeah.
so
You
through,
gotta do what you like.
yeah,
Otherwise
through
you won't stick
experiment,
with
exactly. And it takes experimenting, being willing to try it and fail. But when you do that, when you narrow down, that allows you to go deep and wide with your audience. And when you do that, you can see and hear them because you're reaching a very specific group of people, as opposed to just shooting all of it and just hoping, it just lands on
Right.
somebody.
Oh, that's
So
so
those
true.
would be two um, urgent but simple things I think that people can apply.
Yeah.
Talk to your audience and then
To your
choose one
audience.
vehicle.
So
Choose one
huge.
vehicle. Yeah.
So let's just let's peel back a couple more layers with talking to your audience. All right, because I think this is super, just incredibly important.
Mhm.
And again, most people do not do it. So what do you recommend? Do you recommend like a survey? Do you recommend like Zoom calls? Like what would be a good step to help
Mhm.
our audience move forward on that?
Yeah, it depends on how big your audience is. And so
Okay.
you can do a survey if you have, I'd say, 50 people, maybe or more, that are going to
That are
input.
actually going to fill it out.
Yeah. But
Okay.
otherwise, those one-on-one conversations, and the beauty in that is that those conversations, you don't have to be the one to lead them. You can hire somebody to do it for you.
Mhm.
Have a team member that has a little bit of distance, let
That's a
them
great
do it.
idea.
Back to that idea of narrative therapy, there's a concept of, I think it's called outsider witness, where somebody else sits in and listens to what the person in counseling is talking about, and they give another perspective to help the person in counseling see in a broader way, and that leads to healing. Same
Mhm.
thing, like
Yes.
you're finding an outsider witness who can step in and hear maybe even those hard things
Yeah.
and dig deeper with the client. Like, if I'm on the conversation with the client and they tell me, well, Lindsay, you did X. If I don't have broad enough shoulders, it may be hard for me to keep digging in deeper. Like, I'm at that
Mhm.
point, I may just want to be like, oh my word, like, I'm going to be so
Yeah.
floored that I just want to get
Yeah.
off the phone. So having somebody else do that, and just, it's simple questions. These aren't like deep conversation questions. You're asking for 20 minutes max of their time,
Yeah.
asking questions like, what was going on in your world that caused you to connect with Lindsay? What happened as a result of connecting with her? What could have gone better?
Mm.
Questions like, what can Lindsay learn from others in her space? And I have all of these questions in the resource that people can
Oh,
download.
great.
If you
Oh,
can
yeah.
grab.
Let me share that.
Yeah, there's a resource, and in that resource is a link where they can grab these questions, and they're just really simple questions. And so you have it. Usually I just ask for a phone call. I don't ask clients to get on Zoom with me,
Okay.
because it's just like, Zoom can be one more barrier. I want to make it as easy as possible.
Yeah.
And so if they want to do Zoom, awesome, that's what we do. But
Mhm.
I don't make that like a prerequisite. Is, how can you make this conversation easy, make
Yeah.
it quick, let them know what the questions are going to be in advance, because nobody wants to say yes to surprises.
Right.
Um, and then once even if you're just talking to 3 to 5. Oftentimes for when I'm doing work for clients, I'll just ask to talk to 3 to 5 of their
Yeah,
clients.
and that's what you did for me.
And then I start to see common themes, common
Hmm.
phrases. The research term is saturation. Once you see that the saturation in responses, you know that you probably have a collective idea. And so that's what you look for, whether it's in a survey, whether it is in, interviews that you do, you're looking for commonalities that people are saying. And then those are the pieces that you bring out to inform your messaging and your offers.
Okay. I love that. I think that is a great next step for, I think, pretty much everyone who's listening and watching today. I think that, setting up some of these calls with, just pick a handful of clients. And a great action step would be, first of all, download Lindsay's guide. I've got the URL on your screen. It's Lindsay, Lindsay, hotmeyer.com/brand-story-guide. So download the guide, get the questions, and then I would highly recommend that you set up these informational calls with a handful of clients, and then just start to look, or you could have, a team member do it if that makes you feel more comfortable. Right?
Yeah.
Like if you have a virtual assistant or, someone that can run these calls for you, I do think that could be advantageous, right? It seems like people, might tend to be a little bit more forthcoming, if it's not, if they're not talking directly to you.
Yep.
And then, okay, so we get data, we get information, and then it sounds like according to what you're sharing today, Lindsay, we start to look for the things that we're hearing repetitively, right?
Right. Yep. Those themes, maybe think of it in terms of like shared experiences. And so, people are describing, whether they're describing struggles, similar pain points, similar problem stories, similar preferred stories.
Mm-hmm.
And then you look at your own storyline and you start to say, okay, Sally feels like this. This is a time where I felt that exact same thing. And so that might be an experience that you start to bring into your messaging, or those are struggles that you address in whether it's in your website messaging, or maybe it's blog posts that you write, or a workshop that you offer, or social media posts, that is just this gold for you could generate a year's worth of relevant content based on these interviews alone.
Oh, so good. So good. That is like a juicy nugget. Because quite often people really struggle with, oh my God, what do I write about? Right? Like I can't think of anything.
That goes back to the authenticity piece of, it is that struggle of what do I write about? And so then we turn out these like basic pieces, because instead of going deep, instead of realizing, you know what, Sally struggles with X, and so I'm going to address that, or I'm going to reframe. Like their problem. This is another thing. What we find out with our audience is that oftentimes their problem is not really what they need, right? As the expert, not just the guide, but as the expert, they're going to often be coming to us saying, I want to go on a diet. But as a nutrition coach or a nutrition expert, we know that the problem isn't the diet. The problem is maybe mindset and eating patterns of habits they're falling into, and maybe childhood storylines, like all these things. And so maybe on the surface, like this is a great time for you to step in and reframe something in a unique way. And so you might grab their attention by talking about diet because that's what they think they need.
Right. I love that.
Frame it. It's not just a diet like traditionally, but it's a diet of mindset. It's a diet of habitual thinking. It's a diet of, C, D, and E, whatever those things are. It's that idea of, a colleague had said this to me, and it's not his advice. I've heard it many times since, but he was talking to me about his business, and it completely reframed how I structured my own. He said, Lindsay, we sell to our clients what they think they need.
Yes.
And then we put in that what we know they need. But
Yes.
that's not what they're leading with. You don't lead with what you know they need, because it's so like they're not
It's
at
not
that
what they
level
want.
yet. Right. Right.
Or it's
So
not
that's
what they think they want. Yeah, that is so true. And I see that all the time, right? Like we have to lead with what the client thinks what they want, right? What they actually do want. And then in our content, in our work, we have to deliver both, right? We do have to deliver on, what they want, because that's, how we kind of snag them, right? But we also have to deliver what we know they need in order to be successful.
Yes.
I love that.
I think that's the concept of the guide. I might hire a guide because I want to climb Everest. And so he's going to pull me in with the promise of work with me. I'll show you how to climb Everest. But he knows in that year or 3 years that I'm training with him, there's going to be hell to pay, right? But he doesn't say, like he's not leading with that. He's leading with the promise. He's leading with that preferred story that I want. And then because he's my guide, because he's holding my hand, because he's linked arm in arm on that path with me, he's able to show me exactly what it is that I really need. And that's authenticity. But you can't be that unless you're the guide. You've got to be the guide.
So good. Wow. So many gold nuggets. So guys, I want to remind you, grab Lindsay's guide. You can see the URL on your screen. Go ahead and grab that. And again, I would just say your next step is set up some of these interviews with your clients. Do a little market research. It is amazing. And, why not just plan to do it every year, right?
Absolutely.
It is, things change, language, like it's just so interesting how things shift. And it can just be so incredibly helpful for you to create new, not only your story, but also just to get ideas for, new services, maybe new services or, new courses, new programs, or taking your current set of programs or services and giving them a little bit of a facelift, right? So I find that to be incredibly helpful. Or if you're looking for some ideas on a course, which I know many of you are, it is incredibly helpful. And I can definitely attest to this. When you get conversations set up with your clients or you do a survey, it'll help validate your idea or make you realize, I thought I was going to go in this direction, but actually I think I need to, change, kind of course correct, right? Which is incredibly powerful. So then you're going to have the confidence to know that you are on the right track. So as we start to wrap up today, Lindsay, is there any, final words of wisdom that you'd like to share?
Yeah, just maybe real quick on those interviews. Sometimes with clients, I'll run into, if they're new enough in business, Lindsay, I don't have any clients. What do I do?
Right.
Then I talk to their partners. I talk to their friends. I talk to other people in their sphere. So you don't have to just limit it to your clients. Depending on where you're at in developing your message and building out your business, it may be more appropriate for you to connect with people who are just in your sphere of influence, or people who are your ideal clients who have maybe been in this market but haven't been with you specifically. And so you'll tweak your questions, but you're still gathering information. So that's just a big piece. Like, don't let no access to clients stop you from having conversations. The other piece real quick with the brand story guide, the exercises in that are really designed to help you thicken out that storyline. That's what these exercises are. It's not a template for you to write your own brand story. It's a way for you to find those pieces that need to make their way into your brand story.
I love that.
Yeah.
Okay. Super helpful. All right, guys. Well, thank you, Lindsay, so very much. Really appreciate you sharing all of these ideas and strategies and your wisdom with our audience today. And Really, really happy to have you. And I wanted to mention that mark your calendars for May 2nd, 3rd, and 4th, 7 p.m. Central. I think we're going to go with Central, 7 p.m. Central. I'm going to be launching a brand new, actually a brand new challenge. And it's going to be on how to create funnels. So more to come on that. So just stay tuned. And so we're going to have some fun with that. All right. So it was great spending time with you. Thanks again, Lindsay. And I look forward to seeing you all again next week. Same place, same time. All right, everybody. Take care. Have a great weekend.
Yeah.
Bye for now.